Long have I fought and suffered for my people.
Belegar, the last king under the mountains seeking to reclaim his birthright. For this wannabe Thorin Oakenshield, the dragon he has to fight is a massive army of greenskins keeping Karak-Eight peaks, while marching his army through some of the most hostile territory in the world, and then exposing himself to the savage orcs and rat men at the same time. A brilliant move. His only saving grace is the might of his ancestors, who decided their successor was such a failure that they literally rose from the dead to save.
Welcome everyone, Costin here with my campaign overview guide for Belegar, Iron Hammer, and Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. The AI speech at the beginning of this video was provided by 11 Labs. I just put some audio files for Carl friends, and yeah, you can get some really good stuff from it. Anyway, Belegar's campaign is, from my perspective, probably the ultimate representation of how broken the difficulty curve in Warhammer 3, or Total War in general, can be. See, for a lot of Total War games, not just Warhammer 3, it's the early game that's the hardest part, but if you can overcome those challenges and win, then you'll steamroll the mid-late game. This is especially true on difficulties like Legendary. It's not the case in every game. I think Shogun 2 did a pretty decent job, and there are certainly campaigns in this game where that's not the case, especially a Leaf and R, where the early game might be relatively easy, but once you start getting into the mid, then even late game, you start getting swarms and swarms of enemies coming for you. But you are a powerful faction, you're capable of dealing with that. Belegar's, on the other hand, is very difficult early on. Not necessarily because he doesn't have the combat power, but because, one, he can't really replenish his losses, because he's a dwarf. So dwarfs have poor casualty replenishment, so it's very difficult for them to overcome any losses they suffer in battles, but also because he has some major downsides. The biggest one, of course, is that he has a plus 50% upkeep on his units until he retakes Karak-Eight peaks, which creates a lot of problems, by the way, in his campaign, because you'd want to remove that and you want to hold Karak-Eight peaks, but it would actually, this campaign would be a lot better if you didn't have to rush for Karak-Eight peaks, to be honest. But even then, there would still be problems. He does start with 4 clan Angrand ancestors. Now, these are ghosts. These are ethereal. They have 0 armor, but they will take a lot less physical damage. Though the lower armor does not help them in terms of auto-resolve. Regardless, though, they're really powerful. And the thing is, even though they start, they start with a bunch of skills already unlocked at level 5. So, for instance, the Master Engineer already has Break Open the Casket and Increased Mobility. So you have a great deal of power right from the get-go in your own army. Like, the army itself, without these guys, is pathetic. Like, just 2 Rangers, Dwarf Warriors, Miners, Hammers, not really a good army. But these 4 guys, like in Belegar, they are an army unto themselves. And you probably should keep them together just to have a huge wrecking ball of an army to throw against everyone. The thing is, those ancestors are really the only major campaign benefit you're gonna get. Even when you take Karak-Eight peaks, yes, there are some campaign benefits, of course, and you're gonna lose that upkeep and gain a lot of power as a result of that, but the unique building chain, it's not one that really benefits your campaign, it's one that benefits holding on to Karak-Eight peaks. But the issue is not holding on to Karak-Eight peaks, the issue is trying to build an empire, considering the mess you're gonna find yourself in. Let's just say Belegar's campaign start situation is not the good one. Either way, you do gain 10 leadership when laying siege or encircling. Pretty pointless benefit, because the Dwarven siege plan is to get a lot of quarrelers, artillery, break down the walls, break down the wall towers, kill everything in range. If you have to send your melee units in, you're doing something very wrong. And to be quite blunt about it, Dwarves have great leadership by default, so giving them a leadership benefit just for sieges is pretty redundant. Vanguard deployment during underway battles, also redundant, because underway battle terrain is pretty straightforward, and flanking opportunities are very difficult to get by, and you don't want to deploy close to the enemy, you want to deploy far away from the enemy during an underway battle, so that your artillery and range units can do a lot of damage to the army, or maybe even kill them outright. So it's a worthless benefit. Like, the leadership one, pretty pointless. The underway one, absolutely pointless. Now, Belegar does have a great deal of benefits himself. He's one of the better legendary lords to confederate when playing as the Dwarfs. He does have incredible benefits for his own army, and even the faction, actually. So he gets 20% missile block chance to his army. And this applies to every unit, including artillery. Now imagine making artillery being able to block missiles that are coming their way. Yeah, you suddenly have the best artillery in the game when it comes to artillery duels. You do get the leadership benefit when fighting Greenskins, Ogres, and Skaven. That is much better than the faction-wide benefit, by the way. You also get Mighty Oathstone, which gives you melee defense and expert charge defense, and you also have Revenge Incarnate for more weapon damage and melee attack. Belegar is pretty good when it comes to melee. His items, pretty decent as well, like his shield is really good with that 15% ward save, melee defense, armor. Pretty solid item when we're looking at it. The hammer, I mean, you do get control, post-battle loot, melee attack, magical attacks, weapon strength, and Hammer of Anger, which gives you quite a bit of base weapon damage and armor piercing damage. So it's all pretty solid. I'd say there are better weapons out there, but it's certainly a pretty decent weapon in its own right. But then there's some really sweet benefits for his skill line. Like, he gets diplomatic relations with dwarves, reduces global recruitment, so you can recruit quarrelers, thunderers, dwarf warriors, a lot of units in one turn. You can recruit them as normal. Then he helps with one of the main issues that the dwarves do have, which is their poor local recruitment capacity. But you can improve that by 2 in the province that he's in. He gets charge bonus, leadership point in foreign territory, so he's really good on the attack. He gets a significant benefit of 20% missile strength for rangers and bolt throwers, melee attack for those units, melee defense, and ammunition for miners, so they can use their blasting charges much more, or at least, once or twice more in an actual battle. He does give you hero recruitment feigns in all provinces, hero capacity plus 2 feigns. That's pretty useful. And then he gets Age of Reconquest, which helps him get across the campaign map better. So Belegar's Lord effects, his skill tree, they're pretty sweet. I mean, some things can feel a bit, let's just say, meaningless, like giving bolt throwers melee attack and melee defense, just a bit bonus, or actually any benefit to bolt throwers, because I don't think bolt throwers are useful to use in a campaign as opposed to grudge throwers, but that's just me. But Belegar certainly has a great deal of power. And he actually can make a ranger army incredibly good, not just because of the missile strength, but because of the feigns he starts with. You can get snipe for rangers. Now, what does snipe do? Well, rangers can stay invisible, right? So rangers have stock, so they're invisible. But when they shoot, they're obviously visible. Well, snipe allows them to just shoot while staying invisible. So yeah, pretty damn powerful when you're looking at it. You can do that for an entire ranger army. In fact, the ultimate army for Belegar is his 4 ancestor heroes, himself, as well as a bunch of rangers. Hell, you might even take out one of the feigns and maybe even the runesmith and just add in more rangers. Of course, you'd probably also want some grudge throwers thrown into there just to have the artillery to take down wall towers, like 2 or 3 grudge throwers, but it would be a pretty powerful army. So Belegar has a lot of combat power, but he does pay 50% more upkeep for his units until he takes Karak-Eight peaks. Herein lies the major issue of Belegar's campaign, and why this is going to be a journey of pain and suffering throughout the game. So you start over here with this element. You've got the tier 1 barracks. You can get the tier 2 pretty quickly. You can also get the trinket maker. Generally speaking, I would say you should probably get the siege workshop, but you are going to be able to get the siege unit very quickly in this campaign. So you have a bunch of greenskins, you eliminate them, you attack this element, you take over, then you'll get the opportunity to confederate Karak-Eight. Take that opportunity because Karak-Eight has some pretty good units in their army, including thunderers, grudge throwers, quarrelers, I believe. So you take this army of 8 units, you combine it with your own army, voila, you've got a full stack of troops. Maybe you want to get rid of the miners and dwarf warriors, get more quarrelers, all well and good, but you can get the full stack pretty quickly. Just eliminate these greenskins, then take their capital. You might even divide your forces and have one army trying to siege Karak-Eight, while your other army goes save Tylea. But let's talk about the situation on the campaign map, because there are 2 big problems that Belegar has to deal with. One, the enemies that start next to him, so we're thinking Ekeclaw, Mogre, Sartosa, and of course Scrag. But then there's also the enemies near Karak-Eight peak, so we're thinking Queek, the Crooked Moon Mutinous Gits, Warzag, and even Skarsnik. They're all going to be issues you're going to have to deal with. So you've got quite a lot of legendary lords to deal with in this campaign that are going to be fighting you. Now, you can get a lot of allies, but you might want to save some of the factions that surround you, because you can't take the temperate climate. So what choices do you have in your campaign? You could just merge your armies together and take that stack and go for Karak-Eight peaks, but then you're going to lose your starting province, because the Skaven, Sartosa, maybe even Mogr himself, they're all going to attack you. That's something to bear in mind. So you can rush for Karak-Eight peaks, get rid of the upkeep benefit, and then start playing your campaign. But if you do that, you're going to be deep in enemy territory on your own against Warzag and Skarsnik, as well as Queek. Now, I'm pretty hardcore when it comes to it, but fighting Queek, Warzag, and potentially Skarsnik if he comes down from there is a bit insane to do with just one army in a province that's pretty exposed when we're thinking about Valea Sora over here. Though if you do rush for it, there's pros and cons with both approaches. So if you rush for it, you can help Karak-Azul. They may become a powerful ally. You help them out. You deal with Queek. You reduce the pressure on Forgrim. Oh, all well and good, right? That's something that can work. But if you do that, just bear in mind this. If you do that, you will get benefits with Karak-Azul, and you will get diplomatic benefits with Forgrim. You might even save Barak Var from Warzag, dependent on if you decide to fight Warzag along the way. You have a really powerful army, but it's a single army. And again, you don't have great casualty replenishment, so you need to be careful. You need to choose your fights. The thing is, your army is capable of smashing through Ikekla, Sartosa, Mogr, Warzag very easily, because all of them, like Mogr, Ikekla, Sartosa, Warzag, they stand no chance against the full might of a ranged Dwarven army. So you can just smash your way to Karak-Eight peaks, fight the battle there. Yes, there is a full stack here, but just use the siege tactics like find the dead zone, knock down the walls, use your ranged units to kill as many units behind the walls. Maybe do it multiple times actually in a single turn to be able to take it. But even though this is a full stack of troops, it is certainly beatable with some of your units. Though you may need to get some quarrelers early on to deal with it. Though just to wait to be able to recruit some quarrelers. Bear in mind, however, Karak-Hern is going to be pre-underdeveloped, since you're going to get it at tier 1, and you're going to suffer a control penalty because you've confederated with another Dwarven faction. There might be an argument to be made that confederating them is not necessarily the best choice, but the units they provide, the military units they provide, are pretty damn useful, so I wouldn't turn that down. So you can, as I said, you can rush for Karak-Eight peaks, but there's a bunch of downsides with that. Or you can decide, well, we have Tylea and the Border Princes. They tend to get wiped out by the combination of Ikekla, Sartosa, and Scrag, but you can prevent that. You have the army to wipe out both Ikekla and Sartosa very quickly in the campaign. Like, what do? Is you take out this army, you take out this element, you march an army to Karak-Azor, take Karak-Azor, and then you turn around just at about the same time that Aranessa might be laying siege to the Tylean capital. You might have to make different moves, depending on how things are, but you can certainly arrive as Aranessa is laying siege to it, save the Tylean capital, and then march over to take over Sartosa. You would trade these two territories, like Sartosa would take these two regions, you would trade them back to Tylea, get a bunch of money to help you out in your campaign and the development of your provinces, and then take Sartosa. After which, you can march on Ikekla. Now, Ikekla in general is going to just take this settlement, and only this settlement. So you will have Skavenblight, and he'll have this settlement. His army is no match for yours. Yes, Ikekla is a powerful legendary lord, but outside of the bloody Doom Rocket he has, he's not going to be able to do a lot of damage to your own army. Just be aware that Doom Rocket, and maybe you even want to out-resolve the battle against Ikekla just to avoid having to deal with that. But you defeat Ikekla in a straight-up battle. You take Skavenblight. You shouldn't try and hold it, but you take Skavenblight, you take to borrow. And you might even save Astalia from Mogr if you move quickly enough. Like, if you want to. You can save all these 3 minor factions. Imperial factions, because that's what these guys aren't necessarily the best, but they can be trading partners. They can give you a lot of money for the territory you get. And after you've taken Skaven Blight, whether or not you hold it or develop it for yourself, just bear in mind it's not going to have 12 slots for you. It's going to have, what, 6 slots when you're holding it. It's not going to be, or rather 8 slots. It's going to have 8 slots when you hold it, so it's not going to be that great, and it's obviously going to be exposed territory. But if you wipe out Mogr, that can be great. Or you can just take Skaven Blight, give it to Tylea, wipe out Sartosa, and leave Tylea to try and deal with Mogr. They can be pretty decent at doing so, and you then march east. Just bear in mind, the more time you spend west, that's more time for Warzag and Skarsnik to do their thing. And the problem that ends up happening, is Thorgrim does get put on the back foot throughout this campaign. He might even lose. Like, most of the time I do see Thorgrim beating Skarsnik, but when you're playing Belegar for whatever reason, he tends to lose, actually, or he gets besieged and carries a correct and he pushes back. But generally speaking, Thorgrim tends to be less effective when you are playing as Belegar. In fact, one of the things to say is, like, if you want to play a Dwarven campaign in this area, your best bet is Thorgrim, because Belegar will certainly do very well in his campaign. He'll take a lot of territory, he'll survive. By the way, the more time you spend west dealing with these factions, the more time Warzag, Skarsnik, Queek have to become powerful. Assuming Skarsnik doesn't get wiped out by Thorgrim and Ungrim, which can happen. That would be the best case scenario, but tends not to happen when you're playing Belegar. I've played 3 different Belegar campaigns, and every single one of them I've had to deal with Skarsnik myself. It's pretty annoying. I think Skarsnik may get some buffs when you are playing Belegar or something along those lines. I'm not quite exactly sure what is. I've heard people say that the AI, if you make alliances with them or deals with them, tends to do worse in the campaign. So I don't exactly know what's going on with there. I'm just noticing. I'm just noting what I've observed with Thorgrim doing worse in his campaigns when you're playing Belegar, because Thorgrim tends to win that engagement if you're playing any other faction. But you play Belegar, oof, the game's just going to make it harder for you. So, you do want to head over here. You want to save Barak Var, potentially. Or you want to knock out Warzag. One of the best things you could do is just underway from Myrmidons over here in Warzag's territory, take his capital. Because Warzag does tend to do one major... He tends to do one really stupid thing in his campaigns. He tends to take all his armies, march north, throw everything he has against Barak Var, and maybe even Karazakarak. So his core territory is actually exposed. So you can take Ekrund, the Dragonhorn mines, the Bitterstone mines, though the Stone Mine Tower would not necessarily be worth it. Complete provincial control of the Western Badlands is a pretty tall order, though you could go for it, and you could wipe out and, you know, just take the Stone Mine Tower, come into the Blood River Valley, liberate Barak Var if it has already been conquered, and move in for the Death Pass, and then go for Karak-Eight Peaks. Or you could come over here in the Western Badlands and then take Karak-Eight Peaks. There might be some benefits in establishing a good good territorial control, as opposed to just rushing for Karak-Eight Peaks, ending up taking it, and then having to somehow survive against the onslaught of Queek and Warzag at the same time. Because they're going to throw a lot of armies against you. Armies that you can defeat, but when there's a lot of them and it's difficult to replenish from the losses, it can be tricky. There's a number of mods that I recommend using, like no difficulty, no public order penalty mod from difficulty, craftable casualty replenishment for Dwarves, which gives you 20% casualty replenishment for 200 of gold. I'd call that the pretty essential mod if you're going to play a Dwarven campaign at the moment. Because Dwarves are pretty bad at the moment, let's be honest. Like, Belegar is a powerhouse in his own right, but the factions he's playing, the race he's playing, is not great. And I would say this campaign is brutal, it's unforgiving. You've got a lot of challenges. Like, if you like fighting a lot of battles manually and having to win every single one of them, all well and good. That's admittedly not what I care about when it comes to a campaign, because a lot of battles tend to be boring and tedious, and it's not necessarily a fun experience. But If you're fine playing a lot of battles and having a campaign where you have an exposed start position, but you also need to expand to get rid of a major downside, then this can be the one for you. It can be interesting, I admit. It can be interesting having to fight Ikekla, Sartosa, Warzag, Queek, Skarsnik in like the first 30 turns of your campaign. It can be interesting. I mean, it's kind of hilarious when you think of Belegar's situation. You have 3 legendary lords next to you that you may want to defeat. Then you have 2 or 3 others that you have to defeat. And many of those legendary lords are actually pretty powerful lords. Like Mogr, yeah, he's a joke. Skarsnik, he's a joke. But Queek, he's not a joke. Ikekla, he's not a joke. Sartosa is also a pretty powerful faction, actually, for the Vampire Coast. Because she has the access to certain units that the rest of the Vampire Coast factions don't have. Like, Vampire Coast is not necessarily a great faction, but still. So it can be a fun campaign. It can have a lot on offer, though from my perspective when it comes to playing the Dwarves, I prefer to confederate Belegar than I prefer to play his campaign. Because confederating Belegar gives you all these ancestor heroes, gives you access to Belegar himself and his sweet skill tree, but you don't have to deal with this annoying crap of having to get Karak-Eight peaks back. I mean, I guess I feel like there should be a downside, but I think like the 50% upkeep situation is not good. And the problem is like this province, the vaults, is like if you've got enemies around you, it's very easy for this province to be attacked and you can lose a lot. And also your starting barracks is going to be here in the southern one, which is the most vulnerable of your territories. So your unit recruitment is here. You don't want to build another barracks over here. So yeah, there's quite a few issues in this campaign to overcome. But if you want to, probably one of the more difficult early game challenges in the game, you can go for this. But if you want the campaign with the proper difficulty curve, I would stay clear of this. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.